The sun was just beginning to peek over the skyline of New York City, casting long shadows over the glass and steel tower that housed the Caldwell family's empire. Inside the penthouse, a tension thick enough to cut with a knife filled the air. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire tycoon and master of every boardroom he had ever entered, paced the living room. His posture was rigid, his expression sharp. He was a man accustomed to obedience, to control, to bending the world to his will, but today, something inside him felt unsettled. "Don't touch me," he barked, his voice echoing off the polished marble floors. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Yet, standing calmly across the room, Madison Brooks, the new nanny, met his eyes without a hint of fear. She had been recommended by someone who swore she could handle anything, but Ethan had underestimated the quiet strength behind her serene gaze. Madison took a slow, deliberate step forward, ignoring the tension, the warning, the invisible walls. He had thrown up. "Sir, I'm here to help," she said softly, her voice carrying a certainty that made him pause. Ethan's mind raced. He was used to people bending under his authority, to flinching at his temper, to obeying without question. But Madison, she was different. "I said don't touch me," he snapped again, sharper this time. "And I said I'm here to help," she replied calmly, her hand extended not aggressively, not demanding, but firmly. The standoff crackled like electricity in the air. At that moment, little Sophie Caldwell ran into the room, oblivious to the tension. Her laughter, pure and unfiltered, filled the space with warmth, a stark contrast to the cold rigidity of her father. "Daddy," she shouted, her tiny hands reaching out to him. But as her eyes landed on Ethan, frozen and tense, her smile faltered. Something was wrong. Ethan froze, unwilling to admit weakness, unwilling to accept help, yet unable to act. Madison didn't hesitate. With a grace that seemed almost effortless, she guided him to the couch, her hands steady, her movements precise. "Trust me," she said softly, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of something far in relief. This was more than a simple act of assistance. It was a challenge to his pride, a test of his control, and perhaps, unknowingly, a turning point in his life. Madison had stepped into his world, a world built on power, perfection, and fear, and she refused to bow. Little Sophie clung to him, sensing the fragility in his stance. Ethan's chest tightened. He had always prided himself on being untouchable, invincible, but here was a woman, a nanny, challenging that, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. The stage was set. The billionaire, proud and unyielding; the nanny, calm, compassionate, and unafraid; and the child, innocent yet perceptive, unknowingly bridging the gap between them. What Ethan didn't know was that this confrontation, this simple act of defiance, would ignite a chain of events that would forever change the Caldwell family. It would test loyalties, reveal hidden strengths, and prove that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and stands firm in the face of fear. And Madison? She had no idea that by simply refusing to obey a command, she was about to become the unlikely hero of an unforgettable story. Madison stood in the quiet living room, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he sank into the couch, the lines of tension around his eyes softening just slightly. She could feel the weight of his pride pressing down on him, heavier than any physical obstacle. But she had learned early in life that strength was not always about power, it was about patience, empathy, and courage. And right now, she needed all three. Ethan's gaze flicked toward her, wary, calculating, as though measuring whether she was a threat or an intruder in a world only he could navigate. Why are you so calm?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost curious rather than commanding. "Everyone else, they panic, they freeze, they beg me not to look. But you just..." He paused, struggling to find words. "You just act." Madison didn't flinch. She knew the power of silence. "Because I believe that fear doesn't solve anything," she said softly. "And sometimes, helping someone means showing them they can trust themselves again." He let out a short, humorless laugh, leaning back, unsure whether to be angry or intrigued. Ethan had spent decades controlling every aspect of his life, from boardroom decisions worth millions to the minute details of his home. He had always been the one holding the reins. Now, for the first time, someone was guiding him, gently but firmly, and it made him uncomfortable. Not because he doubted her skills, but because he wasn't used to yielding even in the smallest ways. Sophie, unaware of the complex emotions swirling between the adults, tugged at Madison's sleeve. "Can we play now?" she asked innocently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Madison smiled, glancing at Ethan. "Of course," she said, leading Sophie toward the playroom. She didn't rush him, didn't force him to follow. Instead, she waited, giving him space to observe, to consider, and maybe, slowly, to accept help. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Ethan tried to maintain his old routines, meetings over video calls, endless strategy sessions. The same rigid schedules, but Madison was always there, present, persistent, unshakable. She didn't just assist Sophie, she worked with Ethan, helping him rebuild small routines, regain strength in his arms, stretch muscles that had atrophied. And with every gentle correction, every encouraging word, she chipped away at the walls he had built around himself for years. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Madison found Ethan staring out over the city, lost in thought. He hadn't spoken for nearly an hour, and she approached quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile calm. "Sir," she said gently, "you've done enough for others your entire life. Let yourself be helped now. You don't have to do this alone." He turned to her, eyes meeting hers for the first time, without defensiveness. There was something vulnerable there, something raw and unguarded. "It's not easy," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not used to letting go." "Then let me show you how," Madison said, her hand hovering near his shoulder, not touching, just offering. And this time, Ethan didn't back away. He took a tentative step toward acceptance, as if testing whether courage could also mean trust. It wasn't just about physical assistance. Madison understood that the true challenge lay in breaking through the fortress of his mind. She shared stories of resilience from her own life, tales of overcoming obstacles that seemed insurmountable, of people who had faced fear yet continued forward. Ethan listened, at first skeptical, then intrigued, and slowly, the rigidity in his shoulders began to ease. But progress was never linear. There were moments of frustration, moments where old pride flared, and Ethan would push Madison away, insisting he could do it alone. "I don't need help," he'd say sharply, and Madison would simply nod, acknowledging his struggle without judgment. She knew that real change came from choice, not force. And each time he refused, she let him feel the weight of his own stubbornness until he realized that the path forward was not about resistance. It was about partnership. Then came the moment that would define their relationship. Ethan was attempting to stand from his wheelchair for the first time, without assistance. Madison was nearby, ready to support if needed, but she let him try on his own. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of Sophie playing nearby. Ethan's legs trembled, sweat beading on his forehead, and for a brief second, it seemed he would falter. But then, something remarkable happened. He steadied himself, took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, stood upright on his own 2 feet. Madison's eyes glistened, not with surprise, but with pride. Sophie clapped her small hands, her laughter ringing through the room like a melody. Ethan looked down at himself, then at Madison, and for the first time, he spoke without ego or fear. "Thank you," he said quietly, not just for the help, but for showing him that strength could come in unexpected forms, that courage sometimes required humility, and that even a man used to controlling everything could learn to trust someone else. It was a turning point not just for Ethan, but for the family as a whole. Madison's quiet defiance, her steadfast belief in him, had ignited something deep within. It was proof that resilience could be taught, courage could be inspired, and even the proudest hearts could be moved. And though Ethan didn't yet realize it, the real journey was only beginning, for there were challenges ahead that would test not just his body, but his spirit. And in those moments, he would learn that the bravest thing a person can do is let someone else in. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the Caldwell household began to shift in ways that no one had expected. Ethan found himself waking earlier than usual, not to check spreadsheets or review market reports, but to simply sit by the window, watching the sunrise. There was a strange, unfamiliar stillness in the air, a quiet that carried both reflection and anticipation. Madison noticed it immediately. She understood that change didn't come overnight, and that the subtle shifts in behavior often mattered far more than grand gestures. It was during one of these quiet mornings that the first real challenge arose. Ethan had received a call from a longtime business partner, someone who had always thrived on intimidation and dominance. They wanted him to make a deal, a risky venture that could either solidify his empire or shatter it entirely. For years, he would have pounced, making decisions with ruthless efficiency. But today, hesitation shadowed his eyes. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once signed contracts worth millions. Now slightly trembling from the effort of regaining strength, Madison, sensing his inner turmoil, approached silently, her steps soft on the polished floor. "Sir," she said, "sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about strength or speed, they're about clarity and calm. You've faced chaos before, and you've come through. You can do this again." Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. He had never relied on someone else for counsel in matters of business. Yet, for reasons he could not fully articulate, he found himself listening. Madison's voice carried a confidence that was not commanding, but persuasive, guiding without forcing. It was a subtle art he had never encountered in boardrooms or negotiation tables. As the conversation with his partner began over the phone, Ethan could feel tension knotting in his chest. The words were familiar, but the stakes felt different now. He paused, remembering Madison's advice to approach the situation with clarity. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a breath, slow and deliberate, grounding his thoughts. Then he spoke, not with aggression, but with conviction. The deal was renegotiated carefully, terms adjusted in a way that protected his interests while maintaining integrity. By the end of the call, Ethan realized he had navigated a high-stakes situation without the fury that had once defined him. Later that day, Madison found him sitting alone in the study, the tension of the morning replaced by a quiet satisfaction. "You did well," she said, placing a hand on the back of a chair beside him. "I knew you could handle it." Ethan looked at her, a mixture of pride and disbelief in his expression. "I did it differently than I used to," he admitted, "and it worked." Madison smiled, her eyes reflecting a warmth that went beyond words. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is step away from old habits and trust a new approach. Courage isn't just about action, it's about growth. That evening, as Sophie played in the garden, Ethan felt a stirring he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. It was quiet, but persistent, like a gentle wind that refused to be ignored. He began to see Madison not just as a helper, but as a teacher, someone whose presence challenged him to see the world and himself differently. Yet the true test was still ahead. One rainy afternoon, a sudden medical emergency with Sophie shook the household. The little girl had a severe allergic reaction to something she had eaten, and panic rippled through the house like a storm. Ethan's old instincts surged: fear, frustration, helplessness, but Madison took control immediately. Calm, precise, and unshakable, she administered first aid, called the emergency services, and reassured Ethan in a tone that brooked no argument. Ethan watched, a mix of awe and humility settling over him. Here was a person, a nanny, guiding him through the storm with strength he had never known. The lesson was clear. Courage wasn't always about grand gestures or public victories. Sometimes it was quiet, measured, and fiercely determined, anchored in knowledge and care. When the ambulance arrived and Sophie was safely on her way to the hospital, Ethan followed Madison's lead, holding back panic that threatened to overwhelm him. And for the first time, he realized that letting go didn't make him weak, it made him human. It made him capable of trusting others, capable of connection, capable of resilience. That night, sitting beside Sophie in the hospital bed, Ethan reflected on the weeks that had passed. He had come to understand that the real journey wasn't just about recovery or physical strength. It was about transformation of the heart. Madison's quiet defiance, her unwavering belief in him and in the family, had opened doors he hadn't known existed. She had shown him that real power was not measured by control, but by the ability to adapt, to listen, and to rise above fear. Sophie reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "Daddy, I'm okay," she whispered, her voice tiny but confident. Ethan's heart ached with gratitude. In that moment, he realized that true courage was not just his own, it was shared. It was in Madison's hands, in Sophie's laughter, in the fragile, persistent hope that refused to be crushed. And though the night outside was dark and stormy, inside the hospital room, a light had been ignited, a light of transformation, of bravery, and of unwavering trust. Ethan knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it, not alone, but with the people who had already shown him the true meaning of courage. The weeks that followed Sophie's hospital scare brought a subtle, yet profound, transformation in the Caldwell household. Ethan found himself noticing things he had ignored for years: the way sunlight spilled across the polished floors in the morning, the soft hum of the city through the windows, the laughter of a child that could lift even the heaviest heart. Yet, with every moment of peace came the looming reminder that life could be fragile, that control was never absolute, and that courage was tested most when least expected. It was a rainy evening when the next challenge arrived, one that would push Ethan beyond the bounds of his comfort, testing not just his body, but his very understanding of what it meant to lead and protect. A sudden power outage plunged the mansion into darkness, the storm outside rattling windows and sending torrents of rain against the glass. The calm they had built over weeks seemed fragile in the face of nature's fury. Sophie whimpered in her room, frightened by the thunder, while Ethan felt a familiar surge of helplessness rising within him. Madison acted immediately, her calm presence cutting through the fear like a lighthouse in a storm. "Ethan, grab the emergency kit," she instructed, her tone neither harsh nor commanding, just unwavering. "We need light, we need warmth, and we need to reassure Sophie." Ethan hesitated, uncertainty gripping him. His mind flashed back to moments of pride when he could command any situation with ease. But now, he was not the same man. His body had limitations, and his confidence had been tempered by lessons he hadn't expected to learn. He looked at Madison, her eyes steady, her hands ready to guide but never force, and something inside him shifted. For the first time, he understood that strength could be shared, and that trusting someone else did not diminish his own courage, it enhanced it. Together, they navigated the dark corridors of the mansion, their footsteps careful on the marble floors. Madison's hand lightly guided Ethan as they reached Sophie's room, where the little girl clutched her blanket. Trembling, Ethan knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. But Madison's gentle whisper provided the words he could not find. "We're right here. Sophie, you're safe, you're strong." Ethan realized, in that moment, that bravery was not about facing a boardroom or negotiating $1 million deal. Bravery was about showing up when someone needed you, even if you felt uncertain. It was about holding a child's hand, about offering comfort when your own heart was racing, about standing firm in the face of fear even when you wanted to run. The storm raged on outside, yet inside the room, a quiet warmth emerged. Ethan held Sophie close, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and understood that courage was contagious. Madison's unwavering strength had taught him this lesson without a single harsh word, without the force of command. It was a quiet power, one that demanded respect not through fear, but through unwavering consistency and care. The night stretched on, long and filled with small victories. Ethan helped Sophie with her fears, finding creative ways to distract her with stories, games, and gentle humor. Madison guided him subtly, showing him that patience was just as critical as action, and that listening could be as powerful as instructing. By the time the storm subsided, Ethan felt a new kind of exhaustion, the good kind that comes not from exertion, but from growth. He had faced fear not with dominance, but with empathy and courage, and it had reshaped him. The next morning, as sunlight broke through the clouds, Ethan walked into the garden where Madison and Sophie were playing. He paused, taking in the scene, the child laughing freely, Madison moving with grace and energy, and the sense of calm that had settled over the household. He realized that the lessons he had learned were deeper than physical recovery or control. Over business, They were about trust, resilience, and the strength found in connection. Ethan approached Madison, his expression thoughtful. "You've taught me something important," he said quietly. "I used to think strength was about control. Now I see it's about showing up, even when you're afraid, and letting others be brave too." Madison smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft morning light. Everyone has courage inside them. "Ethan, sometimes it just takes a little guidance to bring it out." Sophie ran up to him, tugging at his hand. "Daddy, play with me," she exclaimed. Ethan hesitated, then laughed a deep, genuine laugh that had been absent for months. He joined her, feeling the lightness that comes from embracing life fully, from participating without fear, from letting go of the walls he had built around his heart. Yet, even in these moments of joy, Ethan knew that life's tests were never truly over. Challenges would come, not just in the form of storms or emergencies, but in decisions, relationships, and unforeseen circumstances. But he had learned that fear could be met with courage, pride with humility, and weakness with trust. And as he held Sophie's hand, watching Madison guide her with patient strength, he understood something more profound. True transformation was not a destination, it was a journey. And every act of bravery, no matter how small, was a step toward becoming the person he had always hoped to be. And so, as the storm clouds dissipated and light returned to the mansion, Ethan Caldwell took his first full, unguarded breath in months. He knew that the lessons of trust, courage, and compassion would continue to shape him, that Madison's quiet defiance had opened doors he never thought to enter, and that the true test of strength lay not in controlling the world, but in embracing it with all its fear, uncertainty, and limitless potential. Life in the Caldwell mansion had begun to settle into a rhythm, but peace, as Ethan had learned, was often fleeting. One morning, a letter arrived, unexpected, official, and unnervingly urgent. It was from a prestigious, philanthropic organization that had been monitoring Ethan's charitable work for years, inviting him to speak at a global conference about leadership and resilience. The catch: the event was only days away, and he was expected to address an audience of hundreds, including seasoned philanthropists, business leaders, and journalists. The thought of standing before so many people filled him with anxiety he hadn't felt in years. His body still bore the lingering signs of weakness. His confidence had only recently begun to rebuild, and the fear of failure loomed larger than any corporate challenge he had ever faced. Ethan paced the room, running his hands over his face, heart pounding. For the first time, he felt the vulnerability of being unprepared in a situation that demanded perfection. Madison entered quietly, her presence grounding. She had anticipated this moment, sensing that the call to public courage would test him more profoundly than private trials ever could. "Sir," she said softly, "fear is natural. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you aware that this matters, and you're not alone. You can face this, step by step, and I'll help you prepare." Ethan stopped, taking a slow breath, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the panic. "But what if I stumble?" he asked, voice tight with uncertainty. "What if I can't project the strength they expect?" Madison smiled, unshaken. "Strength isn't about perfection, Ethan. It's about authenticity. Speak from your heart, and the rest will follow." People respond to courage, not flawless execution. Over the next days, Madison guided him through preparation, not with rigid instructions, but with exercises that helped him connect with his story, his emotions, and the lessons he had learned since his accident. They practiced walking across stages, projecting calmness, breathing through anxiety, and speaking with clarity. With each rehearsal, Ethan's confidence grew, but more importantly, he discovered an inner resilience he hadn't realized existed. Madison's quiet insistence, her faith in his abilities, had unlocked a courage that had been dormant for too long. The night before the conference, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He wandered through the mansion, reflecting on how much had changed. Sophie was asleep, dreaming peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of innocence. The thought of her, of Madison, of the people who had supported him through fear and doubt, filled him with both gratitude and determination. On the day of the event, the grand hall was filled with murmurs, cameras, and the weight of expectation. Ethan stepped onto the stage, his legs steady, his posture firm. Yet he felt the familiar tug of anxiety. Madison stood at the edge of the auditorium, her presence a silent pillar of support. He glanced at her, and in that instant, he remembered every challenge he had faced: the hospital scare, the stormy night, the slow reclaiming of strength, and he realized that fear could be met, overcome, and transformed into action. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began to speak. At first, his voice trembled slightly, but as he shared the story of his accident, his struggle to regain mobility, and the lessons he had learned from Madison and Sophie, something remarkable happened. The audience leaned in, captivated by the raw honesty and courage in his words. Ethan spoke not as a billionaire, not as a tycoon, but as a human being who had faced vulnerability, embraced it, and discovered the power of resilience and trust. He spoke of humility, of the courage it takes to accept help, and of the unexpected heroes who guide us when we least expect it. He spoke of Madison, whose quiet strength had shown him that bravery is often gentle, steadfast, and compassionate. He spoke of Sophie, whose laughter reminded him of the simple, profound joys worth fighting for. By the time he concluded, the room erupted in applause. It was not the kind of applause given out of obligation, but one born of inspiration, connection, and admiration. Ethan felt a rush of emotion: pride, yes, but also gratitude and understanding. He had not only faced a crowd of hundreds, but he had faced himself, confronting fear and uncertainty, and emerged stronger. After the event, Madison approached him, her eyes shining. "You did it," she said simply. "You faced the challenge, and you did so with courage." Ethan nodded, words failing him for once. For the first time, he understood that true strength was not measured by wealth, status, or control, but by the ability to embrace vulnerability, to trust others, and to rise above fear. Madison had taught him that lessons of courage often come quietly, through patience, guidance, and unwavering belief in the potential of others. That evening, back in the mansion, Ethan sat with Sophie, recounting the day's events in simplified words she could understand. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and admiration. "Daddy, you were so brave," she said, hugging him tightly. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he had not known in years. Brave, he realized, was not simply about physical strength or overcoming obstacles alone. Brave was about showing up, about trusting others, and about letting yourself be shaped by love, hope, and resilience. As the sun set behind the skyline, painting the room in shades of gold, Ethan felt a profound transformation. He had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and discovered the remarkable power of courage guided by compassion. And though he knew more challenges would come, he was ready, not as the man who once controlled every aspect of his life, but as the man who had learned to trust, to connect, and to rise even when the odds seemed impossible. The mansion had never felt more alive. The laughter of Sophie echoed through the halls, mingling with the gentle hum of the city beyond the windows. Ethan stood by the grand piano, watching his daughter play a simple melody, and felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Yet, beneath the calm, he sensed that the ultimate test of courage and character was yet to come. Life had a way of presenting challenges when you least expected them, and he had learned that growth was not about avoiding difficulty, it was about meeting it head-on. That evening, a letter arrived, this one unlike any he had received before. It was from a global humanitarian foundation, requesting his participation in an international initiative aimed at providing education and medical aid to children in crisis zones. The opportunity was immense, but so was the responsibility. Ethan had the choice to retreat into comfort, to rely on his past achievements, or to step forward into a world that demanded more courage than he had ever known. He paced the marble floors, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. For a moment, old fears crept in: the fear of failure, the fear of being judged, the fear of not living up to expectations. But then he remembered Madison, standing unwavering through every challenge, guiding him not with force, but with quiet strength. He remembered Sophie, whose innocence and trust had shown him the meaning of responsibility beyond wealth and power. And in that moment, a spark ignited within him. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Madison entered, sensing his inner struggle. "Ethan," she said softly, "opportunity doesn't always arrive neatly packaged. It often comes wrapped in challenge. But you've learned that strength comes from trust, resilience, and compassion. You are ready for this." He looked at her, realizing that she had not only helped him reclaim his own courage, but had shown him how to inspire it in others. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "I've never faced anything like this before." "Then face it," Madison replied, her voice steady. "Not alone, but with the support you've earned and the lessons you've learned. Your courage isn't just yours, it belongs to those you protect and inspire." The decision was made. Ethan accepted the invitation, committing to the initiative with a sense of purpose he had never felt. What followed were weeks of preparation, planning, and learning. Ethan traveled to meet experts, visited the communities he would help, and immersed himself in understanding the challenges ahead. Every step tested him physically, emotionally, and mentally. He faced setbacks, unexpected obstacles, and moments of self-doubt. Yet, with Madison's guidance and Sophie's unwavering belief in him, he pressed forward. One afternoon, during a visit to a remote village, Ethan was confronted with the stark realities of life. Beyond his privileged world, children ran barefoot over rocky terrain, their eyes bright with curiosity, yet their lives were shadowed by hardship. Ethan felt a pang of helplessness, a familiar sensation that once would have frozen him in place. But now, he acted. He listened to the villagers, shared ideas, and found solutions that could make tangible differences. And every time fear or doubt arose, he remembered Madison's words, "Courage is not perfection, it is persistence." Sophie, who had joined him on this journey for a short period, became a symbol of innocence and hope to the children. Her laughter, unguarded and pure, reminded Ethan of what truly mattered. Madison worked tirelessly by their side, offering guidance, support, and unwavering confidence in both father and daughter. Together, they became more than a family, they became a force capable of transforming lives. The turning point came during a community gathering. Ethan addressed a crowd of villagers, local leaders, and international representatives. His voice, steady and sincere, conveyed not wealth or authority, but compassion, commitment, and courage. He spoke of hope, resilience, and the power of collaboration. He acknowledged the struggles, celebrated small victories, and pledged unwavering support. For the first time, Ethan felt the true weight of leadership, not as someone commanding obedience, but as someone inspiring action and change. When the applause rose, Ethan realized that the journey that began with a simple act of defiance, Madison refusing to obey the command, "Don't touch me," had led to something far greater than he could have imagined. It had transformed him, reshaped his understanding of strength, and shown him that courage was not a solitary endeavor. It was shared, nurtured, and multiplied by those who believed in you and those you choose to serve. Returning home, the mansion no longer felt like a place of control, but a sanctuary of growth, resilience, and love. Ethan embraced Madison, his gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Sophie ran into his arms, her laughter filling the room, and he realized that the most profound victories are not measured by wealth, power, or accolades. They are measured by the lives touched, the hearts inspired, and the courage awakened. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Ethan understood the truth he had learned through trials, fear, and unwavering support. Courage is quiet, strength is shared, and the greatest transformation comes when we allow ourselves to be guided by trust, hope, and compassion. Madison had refused a command, Sophie had trusted him, and together, they had shown that even the most unlikely heroes could change the world, not by force, but by standing firm, believing in others, and acting with courage in every small moment. And in that final, golden hour, Ethan Caldwell smiled, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had truly learned what it meant to be brave, compassionate, and human.